This is maximizing the SharePoint user experience with free third-party libraries. Who in here are developers? Yeah. Who is familiar with jQuery? Who's never used jQuery? Okay, so only 2 people will be lost. That's pretty good. So everything we're doing here is kind of, you're going to hope that you have a little bit of jQuery experience, because we're just going to kind of jump into some demos. We got a lot going on. A little bit about me. My name is Mark Rackley. I'm a solutions architect, and I like bacon. I work for a company called Pate Group out of Cincinnati, Ohio. There's our website. You can follow me on Twitter at @mrackley. I'm a developer blogger. My blog is SharePointHillbilly.com. And I'm also an event organizer for an event called Sharepoint-a-Looza, which is over in Branson, Missouri. And I have a couple of T-shirts to give away, actually. So these are like rare T-shirts. So for good questions, I've got a couple of T-shirts to give away. I think Mark's going to help me give those away, so I'll just put them there. And if you have any questions, let me know. We got a lot of demos to go through in an hour. So let's get to this. Our agenda today. What are we going to do? So I'm going to do a demo for you guys to let you know, with all these skills, what you can build as an end product. We're going to talk about why we're developing the way we're developing. I am not going to use the app model at all. Who doesn't like the app model? Oh, come on. Who doesn't like the app model? All right. Yep, I'm not touching the app model. I'm not touching Visual Studio even. Everything we're doing is going to work in Office 365, SharePoint 2007, 2010, 2013. So it's pretty universal. So I'll talk about why we're going to do this, and then we're going to go through several demos using jQuery, Jquery Ui, and some libraries called FullCalendar and Bluff charts. As soon as I can get a decent internet connection, all of the code samples from this session will be at this GitHub address, and you guys can take a look at that stuff. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I had a client a couple of years ago, large corporation, who wanted a contract management solution in SharePoint. But they did not want to spend a lot of money on a solution. And if you think about it, SharePoint does about 85% of what you need it to do out of the box for a contract management solution, right? You've got documents, versioning, you've got metadata, you've got approval workflows, you've got all the different lists and libraries you can use. So it does so much of it, record retention. It's all there. All the pieces are there. It's just, it's SharePoint, right? So it doesn't quite look well. It doesn't have great usability. Maybe your reporting's not great. So what I was able to do for them, I says, look, what I'm going to do, this is in SharePoint 2010, by the way. So I'm going to build you a site collection. I'm going to gather all your requirements. Is he all right? OK, so I'm going to build you a site collection. It's going to have all your lists and libraries in it, and you're going to start using the application. In 2 weeks, you're going to start using it. You're going to start uploading your contracts. You're going to start creating tasks, and you're going to fill it out. And as you use it, you're going to tell me about all those requirements you forgot to tell me about. And I'm going to start adding those requirements in. And then I'm going to start building up dashboards and forms around you using client-side development techniques that you're going to see implemented as you use it. And because we weren't out there deploying solutions and having to stop production or do anything, they got to see the application built around them. And it became something they really liked and they took ownership of because they helped design the end application. And in the end, they had exactly what they wanted and not what they thought they needed at the beginning. So we're going to quickly show you a version of that application that I built. And this was built in, and this is now in Office 365. Can I see that OK? So here we have just a normal SharePoint site. We have lists and libraries for storing things for vendors, contracts. We have a list for products and services for a vendor, just a bunch of different metadata for those contracts. And the thing about this contract management solution, everything they did revolved around vendors, right? I had to find my vendor and then find the contracts for that vendor. The only problem with SharePoint is how do you make it easy for someone to find the vendor that they need, right? How do you start that approach? If you use SharePoint search and you type in the name of a company, right? Let's look up Contoso here. When you get back the results, if I get back the results, all right, we all know what SharePoint search looks like. Come on, SharePoint search. Really, if the search portion of it out of the box doesn't work, then we are in for a long session. Luckily, I have another version of it over here for you guys. I don't know what is going on with Office 365 for me. All right. So over here, we have another version. Let's say we do a search for, this is my on-premises SharePoint. So when you do a search, and it comes back, you see your normal SharePoint search results. But even though you're looking for a specific vendor, hurry up, SharePoint. Even though you're looking for a specific vendor, you get back a ton of results, right? You don't find the exact vendor you need. You find all the different places that the vendor is referenced. You don't find that vendor you want. So, well, maybe you need to go to the vendor's actual list or library. But then you have to click like all these different locations just to find the information you want. You go to the vendor. You want to go search for a specific vendor. Let's go ahead and filter it by Initech. And it's just multiple clicks just to do something simple that everybody needs to do every single day. So using a little bit of SharePoint's REST and using a third-party library that I'm actually going to do in my session tomorrow, plug for my demo tomorrow, called data tables, you can simply load your data from a list, and it comes with this built-in search box, so you can start typing, and it automatically filters the list to what you want. Then I can just click on that and get directly to the vendor I'm looking for. And here we have the out-of-the-box SharePoint display form for an item. This is that ugly single-column form, but I've applied some jQuery and a couple of libraries, jQuery Ui Tabs, to this form to make it look nice, so that the data is laid out in a more usable fashion. It's not some long, horrid vertical screen. And you get different tabs for different information, so it allows you to do more. We also have lists here for contracts and services and their products. And we also know from looking at this, we're looking at the vendor Contoso. Well, if you want to add a product for a contract or for a vendor, the problem with those lookup fields for those products is if I go straight to that vendor, let's do it the old way. I go to the products and services list. And I go to enter a new item, I've now got to search through all my vendors to find out what vendor am I going to be setting to this product, right? You don't know which that should be. But using some of the techniques like client-side development, I can click on a company. I'm looking at Pollos Hermanos here. I know I'm Pollos Hermanos, so whenever I go to add a new product, I can set the value of that automatically using some client-side development techniques. So you're stopping your users from entering incorrect data. Another thing you can do is, well, this is for a product or a service, right? Well, for a service, I just want to know some comments about the service. But for a product, I need to show additional fields. So using some client-side techniques, you can take, again, the out-of-the-box new form in SharePoint, and you can make it dynamic so that you're not having your users have to do so much work. A couple of other things. We did the same kind of customizations to the contracts form. So instead of seeing, again, that long, super long vertical form, we now see a tabbed version of that. We have all the different information for a contract. And you can come in here and see that in a more laid out, nicely laid out fashion. So you can see how using these things gives those SharePoint forms actually a decent look without having to go spend a ton of money, on some third-party library. Some of the other things we added to this product are a dashboard. So the problem with the calendar views in SharePoint is you get a start date and an end date, and that's all you get in your calendar view. Well, contracts have a lot more than start dates and end dates, right? They've got start dates, they've got review dates. Let me get this where you can see it better. They've got start dates, end dates, review dates, maintenance review dates. There's all these dates for contracts, and so your out-of-the-box calendar view is not going to work. So using one of these libraries, it's called FullCalendar, which I'll show you guys how to use, you can take a list with many dates, and you can populate a calendar with it. And you can apply some more jQuery to it. So let's say this calendar gets too crowded. I'll just make it to where when you click on those types of dates, it hides all but the ones I really care about looking at. So it's just, again, making SharePoint do what it does well, but making it more usable to the user. Let's see if this is working yet. Now this is working. We also have some tasks, so you know the task status. do some graphing of the tasks. So you want to know what the status of your tasks are. Let's look at a bar chart to see the task of the tasks, who they're assigned to. Maybe I want to see a pie chart. So you can easily see graphically what's going on with your tasks for your contracts. One of the last things we did for these guys is we did some styling. So this is a default out-of-the-box SharePoint list view that we just applied some styling to. So we can know visually, looking at this list view, if any of those contracts are almost late or any of them have any of those 5 dates that are late. So it's just giving users better visual cues to what's going on. Seem interesting to you guys? That's kind of what you want to learn about, how to do this stuff? All right. So let's get started actually writing some code. So actually first, why are we going to use this approach, right? For one thing, we're letting SharePoint do most of the work. I actually argue with Jeremy about this approach a lot because he's all about app model, app model, app model, app model, right? But I don't want to write a SharePoint app. I want to let SharePoint do what SharePoint does. I want to use SharePoint's list view, SharePoint's forms. I don't want to have to deploy anything to the store. I don't want to have to fight Visual Studio. I just want to get my work done. And SharePoint does so much out of the box. So let SharePoint do most of the work, and then we just make it look better and function better. And you get that improved user experience, right? Your users are going to be much happier using something that they're comfortable with, that looks better, and it's going to catch more of their mistakes. You're going to get improved user adoption because of that. At the end of the day, it's about making the users happy, right? We want them using our applications. And by using it this way, where you're building up the application around them, you've got very excited and engaged users. And at the end of the day, it's their application. They helped build it. They had an idea, and they saw it implemented, and so they get excited about it. Also with this, you get a really rapid, agile development process. You can gather requirements. You can deploy those requirements easily without having to go through any kind of deployment, huge deployment process. You also get that immediate feedback from the users. They like it, they don't like it, let me change it. They still don't like it, let me change it. They still don't like it, okay, now they like it. You can do a lot quickly. We also don't need server access. Deployment and maintenance are easier because of these are just going to be scripts stored somewhere locally that you can access. Upgrades can be painless. This contract management solution I wrote it for 2010. I copied all the content to 2013 in Office 365. I changed my REST queries to 2013, and for the most part, it just worked. So upgrades can be really painless with this approach. This stuff works in 2007, 2010, 2013. Of course, if you want to use 2007, we're going to have to talk to Mark Anderson here about his library SP services. Am I using SP services? This is the guy that wrote it, so you can blame him for it. Also, you don't have to be a development guru, right? You don't have to understand that app model. You don't have to understand OAuth. You don't have to understand all that stuff that makes you want to pull your hair out. Learn some JavaScript, some jQuery, dig into those libraries, and you can do a lot out of the box. And you don't need any expensive tools, or you don't need any tools at all. No Visual Studio. If you've got Notepad and access to a document library, you can do everything we're going to do in this session. And that's all you need. So how are we going to implement this? We're going to do this as simple as possible. Again, we just want to get our jobs done, right? We want to do it as little interference with SharePoint as possible. We're going to store our scripts in the document library, and we're going to add a content editor web part onto SharePoint's pages to apply that script to the page. And we don't have to edit any of SharePoint's pages. If any updates come out, it's not going to trash the page. Best case scenario with this approach is if SharePoint decides to go, Microsoft says, hey, we're going to push out a bunch of changes and not tell anybody about it, and it breaks your page. I know they would never do that, but if they did and it broke your page, all we have to do is delete that content editor web part off the page, and it's back to the default page. So it's very easy to roll back from any of these changes as well. It's a very non-invasive approach to development. All right, so let's actually start doing some stuff. We're going to start with the very basics. I'm going to show you how to get jQuery working on some of your default forms in SharePoint. First, we'll talk about jQuery and Jquery Ui. For those not familiar with jQuery, it's just a JavaScript library. They've made it easier to do things in JavaScript by giving you easy-to-call functions. It's really good for traversing the page and making changes to the page, making it interactive. It's a great library. It's supported by Microsoft. If you go to create a SharePoint-hosted app, it includes jQuery for you automatically. So it's not like it's some weird library that people aren't using. Here is probably one of the most basic jQuery scripts that you can create. We are loading in this script the jQuery library and also a library called jQuery.cookie, because we're going to be using some cookies to read and set values. And here we have this function in our script called jQuery document ready. What's important about this function is this is the function that gets loaded after the function that's executed after the page finishes loading. That means if you're wanting to interact with anything on the page, make sure you execute it within that document ready function. Otherwise, your script may execute before the page is loaded, and then your script just doesn't do anything. And what's worse, it won't throw any errors. It just won't do anything. Or maybe every 5th time you refresh it, it does work, because it happened to load the script after the page was loaded. So make sure, if you want to do something in the page, do it in the document ready. Also, here's an example of how you set cookies using the cookie library and how you read a cookie from a cookie library. Right. So let's demo some of this real quick. Any questions? All right. I'm sorry? Using the SharePoint onload, you can use that as well. I'm a creature of habit. So I use the jQuery document ready. What about you, Mark? What do you use?
The thing with document ready that can be a problem is MDS.
I disable multiple download. Yeah, I disable minimal download strategy because it causes all sorts of issues. Maybe I should have had a slide for that. If you're having issues and you're saying the script doesn't work, try disabling minimal download strategy. It is supposed to make your pages load faster by only loading the differences in a page, but when you're deploying some scripts, even things like custom actions, your scripts won't execute. So if you're in Office 365 and it's not working, you have to make sure your minimal download strategy feature is disabled. Thank you for that. You want a t-shirt? No, okay, good. All right. Okay. The thing is, if you get the t-shirt, you have to wear it. I'm very proud of my t-shirt. So if you're going to take one, you got to wear it. I want to see it on you guys. All right. So here we have the most basic jQuery function again, where we're just going to pop an alert when the page is loaded, and we'll do an alert too here. I'm going to open up our site in SharePoint Designer. I like to use SharePoint Designer for this type of development because whenever I save a script in SharePoint Designer, it automatically uploads it back to the document library for me, so I don't have to go through and upload the file and do anything with that. It just takes care of it for me. So here in our site assets library and our SharePoint site, I'm going to add a new asset, a JavaScript file, and I'll keep it simple and call it 1.js. I'm going to edit the file and just paste in that script. Again, it just references the jQuery library and pops up a couple of alerts. So back in our SharePoint site, I'm going to go to our vendors list, and I wanted to edit the display form of my vendors list. To do that, I'm going to go to the vendors list and click on the list tab, and under the form web parts, I'm going to click on default display form. This opens the display form in edit view. And I was testing the script, so let's go ahead and delete this. Right, so here's our form in edit view, and now I'm going to add a web part, and I'm going to add a media and content editor web part. Can you guys see that? Should make it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to add a content editor web part, and then I'm going to edit the web part. I'm going to put the link to the script here in the content link section. So that file was in site assets, and I called it 1.js. Now, when I apply this script, you'll actually see those alerts fire that I have in the script, because it will start applying the script on the page load. Really? Did I save this page? 1.js. Did I spell site assets wrong? Oh, wrong path. This path needs to be correct. And you can do the fully qualified domain name if you want. I usually use the relative path, especially if I'm copying files around. So I apply it, and the script executes. So first you see it executed 2, even though 2 was at the bottom of my script here. It didn't alert the 1 first, it did the 2. When I click OK, it finishes loading the page, and then it does the one. So you can see there why it's important to put that script inside of the document ready. All right, so now we are executing script on this default form. So that's fine and dandy, but what can we actually do with that? Well, why don't we make it to where when you want to add a product to a vendor, you can know the ID of that vendor and pass that ID of the vendor to the new product form. So the user does not have to select the vendor from a drop-down list. So we're going to use some jQuery as well as some cookies to do that. So I'm going to come back into our page here. I'm going to edit the form again. And I'm going to get rid of those alerts so they're not too annoying. What's great, to get rid of the alerts, I don't have to redeploy anything. I just comment out the script, save it, and now this script is applied to the page so my alerts are gone. When I add a new web part, it is going to be the products and services web part, which is going to show the list of products and services. And now I only want this to show the products for my current vendor. And I do that using a web part connection. So we're just going to set up a connection between this list. We're going to get the filter values from vendors, where the ID from vendor goes to the vendor field in the products field. And now when I finish and look at this page, it's only showing the products for the current vendor. So now, when you click on new item, it goes to the new item for the products page, but this vendor field is not set. We want this vendor field to be set correctly. So to do that, we have a little script here. First, let's take a look at this. One of the things you're going to learn with jQuery is how to dissect how SharePoint manipulates a page. What does SharePoint do to a page? So that I know how to write jQuery to actually do something to that page. And to do this, I open up Developer Tools by pressing F12, which gets your Development Tools console. This works in Chrome, it works in IE 10, IE 11, and all of them. I use IE 10 because I actually like the Developer Tools better than IE 10. I'm, again, kind of a creature of habit there, but I like it a little bit better. But we can click on the arrow here and get this page into a mode to where whenever you hover over your different parts of the page, you get a blue box. Because I want to know, whenever a user clicks on this new item link, what I want to do is I want to set a cookie to the value of the vendor's ID when someone clicks on a new item, because they're going to add a product. Well, which vendor are we setting this product for? But to do that, I need to know how to attach to the event when someone clicks on new item. So we look at new item, and we click on it, it brings us to the way the HTML is rendered for that new item. And if we look at it, it says that we have a table cell that has a class of MSListAddNew. And that is what is the class that you click on for that add new item. So knowing that, I can now write some script. It's going to say, when the page loads, I want to find that table cell that has that class MSListAddNew, and I'm going to attach a click function to it. And when someone clicks on the add new, I am going to call this JavaScript function here that gets the URL, the ID from the URL of the vendor page. Because if we look at that display form for the vendor page, we see there's a URL with ID equal to, in this case, is 1. And that ID in the URL is the ID of the vendor we're looking at, right? So on both your edit forms and your display forms, that ID will be the ID for your current item you're looking at. So we want that ID, because that's our vendor. So we're saying, get the ID from the query string, and we're going to set a variable called vendor ID. Then let's alert this out so we know that we're getting it properly.
What if you have two web paths with a new button?
I'm sorry?
How do you distinguish between the two web paths which have a new button on each?
Because this add new, that td-add new is just on lists, right? If you had multiple lists on your page, it would fire for each of those.
Is there a way to distinguish between them?
You could, yeah, because you could then, you could traverse, now that you know how to find the list view with jQuery, you can then start using jQuery's method to traverse up and down a little bit from where you're at to say, well, get me the title of this web part. Oh, this title is not products and services, ignore it. So you can, and we'll kind of do that in one of the other demos, that we kind of find part of what we need. Because a lot of time with jQuery, you can't find exactly what you need. You find something close, and then you search up or search down until you make sure, oh, this is what I need. So that's kind of what you have to do. You have to do a little more work if you want to make sure it's a specific list.
But there are attributes which I can use in a robust way, which wouldn't switch around if I drag the web part from top to bottom of the page.
I'm sorry.
So if I mean, there is robust attributes that I can actually rely on that wouldn't switch around if I drag the web part from the top page to the bottom page and then the elements switch around.
Yeah, and that's why I don't use IDs and stuff, because those can change so much. I try to find an attribute that's consistent, and then use things like the web parts title, because I know that's going to be consistent as well. So you try to find those attributes that are consistent when you're traversing and stick with those. Yeah, good question. So we're going to get that vendor ID. We're going to alert it out, make sure we got it correctly, and then we're going to create a cookie using the jQuery cookie library. And it's going to be called vendor ID. It's going to be the value of the vendor ID. And we want to set this path to the root because we want this cookie to exist outside of this page. So if you want the cookie to exist somewhere else, make sure you set the path. And then we're going to alert the cookie value back out to the user just to let us know that we're able to read the cookie properly. So if we take this script, go back to Sharepoint Designer, and just replace our script that we had there with it. Now come back into our page. Let's go back to our vendors list, choose a different vendor. Let's do Stark Industries. So now if I didn't screw anything up, when I click on new item, we should get an alert that is 6. And then it should read the value of 6 from the cookie as well. So we got 6 because I read that from the query string, and now it's saying it read a cookie value of 6. So we've set the cookie and we can read it. So good. So now we need to add a script onto this new item form for products and services to read the value of that cookie and set the value of that field. So very much along the same lines of what we've been doing. Here we have a script where we're getting the value of the vendor ID from the cookie, and then we're clearing the cookie because we don't want this field set every time we go back to the page if it's not for the vendor we're looking at. So let's clear the cookie. Let's go ahead and alert the vendor ID to the user to make sure it was read properly, and that's what this script does. Just make sure we're getting that cookie properly. So back in SharePoint Designer, back in our site assets, we're going to add another file. We'll call this just 2.js. Going to keep it simple. Paste that in there. And now we go back into our site, go to the products and services list, go to the default new item form. We already have a content editor here. I'll add a new one, though, to be consistent. We're going to add a web part. Media and content, content editor. Edit the web part, and we're going to link it to that file we just uploaded. You can use the script editor web part if you like, but I like to use the content editor web part because I like to create one master script that I put all my changes into. And that way I just have to update that one script. If you use the script editor, you can make it reference multiple scripts, but if you ever have to add another script to reference, you have to edit that script editor on every page that uses the script. So it's a little bit easier for me to use the content editor web part to do this. We'll call that 2.js. So when we apply it, it should read that cookie and alert it to us, whatever it was last set to. It's saying null. So let's go to a vendor. Heisenberg Pharmaceuticals. Do a new item. It's saying its I is 5, the cookie is 5, and now it's alerting us 5 from the new item form. So we have read the value from the cookie of 5. So now we need to set the vendor field to that value. So how do we do that? Well, if we want to see how SharePoint is rendering this field, we can again press F12 to open Developer Tools and inspect the page. We can click on this vendor dropdown. And when we look at it here, let me copy it so we can see it easier. If we look at the way SharePoint renders this select, we have a title equal to vendor, which is the display name, and then we have this very long ID. Normally in jQuery, we like to use element IDs, right? It's going to be the fastest way to get to an element. However, do we want to use that ID? No, and in fact, you can't, because there's a $sign in the ID. If you try to use jQuery to get this element, it's going to throw an error at you because it doesn't like $signs. And in fact, this ID can actually change depending on the order of fields in the form. So we cannot use that. However, we can use jQuery using that title attribute to find the field. So I can actually write some jQuery to say, find the select on the page that has the title attribute equal to vendor. And that is how we find the element. If we want to set the value of that select, we use the .val method. And the example we had, Heisenberg, was 5, right? So I can actually say set the value of that select to 5. And if we want to test this, we can also do that in Developer Tools by going into our page, clicking on the Console tab, and I can actually just paste that line of script there in the Console tab if I want to test it and make sure it works. So I can press Enter. If I wrote that correctly, we'll see the vendor field automatically set. And you can see it set the vendor field for us, Heisenberg Pharmaceuticals. Right, so now we know that that's the piece of script we need, so I can come back into my file here, and instead of alerting that vendor ID, I'm going to set the value of that select to the vendor ID. All right, read the cookie, clear the cookie, set the select to the ID that is that vendor. Let's save it. Shut up. You just messed up my demo. He already screwed it up. Would this work? No, because I was trying to do something to the field outside of the document ready. So the page was going to load. Thanks, Mark. He just ruined my demo. This was the best demo of the whole session, and you just ruined it. So it's all right. So I need to put this stuff inside of my document ready because we don't want to do it. What's that? Thanks. It's a great. I'll take one. So I need to put this inside of my document ready. Save it. Thanks again, Mark. All right, so we go to our vendors list. Let's check Cyberdyne Systems. Click on New Item. Its ID is 7, cookie value 7. And we can see that it's set the drop-down list of Cyberdyne Systems. All right, so now you're setting these fields for the users. They're not going to choose the wrong thing. Makes everybody happy, except when people screw up your demos, then it makes you irate. Okay. Last demo we're going to do on this real quick is let's go ahead and make it so that unless a user has selected product, we want to hide the product-related fields, right? Very similar to what we've been doing, just another approach. We want to hide the license type, license model, quantity, purchase date. We want to hide those fields unless it is a product. So here I have a couple of functions, one called show fields and one called hide fields. And here we're finding those different fields. And here's where your question was if you don't know the exact attribute. Like I don't know, I need to hide the entire row that a field is on. I don't want to just hide the field because I need to hide the label too. But how do I find the entire row for a field? So what I tell it is, I want to find the select that has a display name of license type and then find its closest row. Search up the page until you find the row that I'm contained in and then hide that entire row. So even though I didn't know the ID of that row or how to find it, I knew where to start and then to just search up until I found the row, and now let's hide that entire row.
Just one question. What do you do when there is no field name in the title for user fields, for example?
So user fields are a whole different beast because they've got their own, there's the whole part of CSOM that you can use to set and get those fields. Yeah, so depends on your elements, we will have to do some additional digging. You'll see when we have to actually use the checkbox, it doesn't have the title attribute either. You have to figure out, you have to look at that page, how does SharePoint render this, and find something that you can identify consistently, and then move up or down the page until you find what you're really looking for. So there's a little bit of art to it, but yeah, sometimes you just have to dig around for it a little bit more.
Will this work in multi-language?
It should.
Multi-language.
Yeah, it should.
Because title always changes. Easily.
The title attribute?
When the field has localized label.
Oh yeah, if it's local, I'm sorry, localized. Yeah, you would have to take into account that as well, the localizations. Yeah. So, I'm American. We only know America. Sorry. So yeah, so let's find those fields and hide them, or let's find those fields and show them. And so to your point about those fields that don't have the title attribute, if we look at the way SharePoint renders that product checkbox, again, by opening up the developer tools, inspecting the page, and then clicking on that checkbox. Let me get this where you can see it better. We can see that that checkbox has an ID called offering underscore blah, 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 blah. But it has no other attributes except the type of checkbox. How do we know that's the product checkbox they checked on? Because we don't know the title for it. So what we can do is we look for an input that's of type checkbox, and then find its closest span, the span that I'm contained in, that has the title attribute equal to product, right? So I'm no longer saying find the checkbox. I'm saying find the checkbox, now find the span that has the title attribute set. Okay, that's how I know this is the right checkbox. Does that make sense?
Did you not go the other way and start with the title and then get the input underneath it?
Yes, and another method would be to find the span that has a class of MS radio text that has a title equal to product, and then find its input. So there's several ways of going up and down.
That would be just one selector rather than selecting something and then traversing the...
Do you want to come teach this? Okay. No, I'm kidding. No, he's right. And that's kind of the trick, because client-side development is not the fastest thing in the world. You want to understand the page and what's the quickest way I can get to that element I'm looking for. And so he's saying, yeah, just find that span, then get its checkbox. Right. Brilliant. I'll change the demo for the next one. Okay. Somebody else had a question?
Yeah. Lots of times SharePoint puts GUIDs near the objects. So for instance, this GUID here could be the field GUID, the field internal GUID, and this doesn't get changed by language or whatever.
So for a lot of folks, GUIDs make their head explode. Right, and how do I find the right GUID? How do I know it's the right GUID? You know, and so yeah, you can find other objects. The cool thing about jQuery is there's 1,000 ways to do it, right? So you could use the GUID. If you can figure out the GUID is, use it, and it stays consistent, right? So you could go find the span, and then find the checkbox in the span, or you can find the checkbox and go up to find the span. So there's a lot of ways to do all these things.
Yeah, wouldn't it be possible, maybe a better approach?
No, not a better approach. A different approach.
Append the ID onto the URL of the new item rather than having to set a cookie.
You can't do that with document libraries.
Really?
Document libraries bring up your dialog to upload. He was saying, why can't you just append the ID of the parent to the new item so that when it goes to the new item form, the ID is already appended? For document library, when you go to add a new file, it first brings up the upload dialog box before the property dialog box, and that ID does not get passed to the property dialog box that comes up next.
Right, but that page you're looking at was in the document library.
No, but this was just an example with a list.
Yeah, so if you were using the list, you'd probably carry on.
Shh, yeah. Man, are all you guys like this? I'm kidding. So yes, for a list, we could have said, well, let's just change the URL to the new item form and pass in the parent ID about that. I've actually blogged about that. You can do it that way, but it doesn't work for document libraries. And I like to be consistent, so let's just do it one way, and do the same way for lists and libraries. And that way, when multiple developers are working on it, they don't get confused by the multiple ways of doing it. Or they don't try to use my list way and a document library way and say, hey, it doesn't work, go fix your script. And say, no, you don't know what you're doing, use it a different way. So yes, maybe. So yeah, so again, lots of ways to do this stuff. If you've got a better way, I'd love to hear. I'll give you a hard time about it, but I'd love to hear better ways to do this stuff. Where was I? Anybody remember? So I'm going to find the input that's type checkbox. Actually, I may find this. I actually may have done what you did. Let's see. Let's look at my script. Maybe I'm just so good at this, I actually did it. So if we look up, I already did that. Let's find the span that has that class MS radio text that has the title equal to product, and then find its checkbox. So.
Did you rename the column from product, from offering to product? Because the
Yes.
start with offering.
Irrelevant, but yes. Shh. All right. If it's checked, if this checkbox is checked, we want to show the fields. If the checkbox is not checked, let's hide the fields. Anybody else? All right. We have like 4 more demos to go through. So open up our script again. Just overwrite that. So again, when the form loads, we're just going to hide them by default, and then we're going to attach that click event of the product. Reload our page. So now you notice the product fields are hidden. If we click on product, it shows them. Uncheck it, hides them, shows them, hides them, shows them. So okay, some other things you can do. And you can, again, you can keep adding to these scripts to totally customize the way these forms look. If we had more time, I would show you how to add the tabs to the page. We're actually going to use the tabs somewhere else so you guys can see how that works. Any questions? Not from him. Yeah, when you're adding 2 or 3 scripts to a form, you want to do things. I mean, there's just some best practices you have to keep in mind. Don't duplicate variable names if you can. Don't add the same script reference multiple times, because that could break things. The last script loaded wins. So if you use something that's the same name, or you've referenced the 2 different versions of jQuery, or just something, there's so many things that can go wrong by writing multiple scripts and trying to hodgepodge them onto a page. Yeah, don't cut and paste. Don't do it. Right.
I don't know how to leave them together.
Okay.
Is that what you're saying would work? You have to find a way of putting them in one script.
Right. You'd find some way to bring them all together, right? And just put them all in one file. Remove things, the script references. Like if you go to my site, I try to give standalone scripts that work on their own, but that means I'm referencing all the scripts you need. So if you drop 2 or 3 of my solutions on the same form, it's not going to work because you're referencing libraries multiple times. I try to avoid global variables at all costs, but there may be some conflicts there. So you've got to kind of understand what the script is doing so that you can clean that up and make sure that those conflicts don't exist. Does that make sense at all? All right, talk to me afterwards, and I'm more than happy to help. And that wasn't a blow-off. That was really talk to me afterwards, and I'll help you out. All right, so let's actually go on to our next demo. We're going to talk about jQuery Ui. I use jQuery Ui a lot because it has tabs, accordions. It's got a nice little calendar if you want to use its calendar. It's got some nice styling, so you can use themes and style sheets, so you can color code things. It has a lot of features I like to it. We're going to be doing something with jQuery Ui Tabs. And this is what the basic structure looks like for jQuery Ui Tabs. So out of the box, you look at the documentation, you have an unordered list of list items. Each list item is the title of your tab, right? And each list item points to a div that has the content for that tab. And then you execute this .tabs method on the div that contains your tabs, and that turns that list item and all that into a nice-looking tabs. So let's go ahead and demo this out. 15 minutes left. So here I have a script. I'm referencing jQuery min and the jQuery min style sheet. And this is how you can get different colors, is just by doing a different style sheet for jQuery UI. jQueryUI.com. There's a themes section. You can set it to any colors you want. You can make it perfect for your company. When the page loads, I'm going to execute this tabs method on this div I've got called tabs container. It's got an unordered list called hillbilly tabs. It's got my tabs with some hard-coded content. I'm using Bacon Ipsum to create the content. If you haven't checked it out, check out Bacon Ipsum. Go back into Sharepoint Designer, site assets, new JavaScript file. We'll do 3.js. Sorry, I'm in hyper mode now, but you can still stop me if you have questions. Paste that in there. Go to our site. Let's just go to our home page. I'm going to edit my home page here. Add a web part. Media and content, content editor. We are going to edit the web part. We're going to link it to site assets 3.js. Stop editing. And we have a tab. 3 tabs, hard-coded content, 1, 2, 3. Not very helpful, right? How many hard-coded contents do we have on our page? We don't have a whole lot. So let's make it more usable, and let's put a web part on the page, and let's move that web part into one of those tabs. Okay? So I'm going to edit the page again. I'm going to add a web part, and let's add our vendors list here. Here we see our vendors list was added. And we want to move this vendors list into a tab. So we have a couple of ways of doing this. Let's find out how SharePoint renders this list. Press F12, inspect the page, click on vendors, because you know it has the title of vendors. And we can see that within that, we have a span with the title vendors that has an ID of web part title WPQ4. So that's what our web part is contained in. So I can modify that script quite quickly. And I can basically say, hey, I know the ID of that web part. It was MSO zone cell WPQ4. Let's take that web part and let's append it to our first tab. Append to actually moves that content. It doesn't create a copy of it. So we're going to take that content from that web part and move it into one of our tabs. Let me get rid of this content that's already here. Copy and paste this in. And now I'll refresh the page. And we see our vendors are in that first tab, right? Just that easy. Find the web part, move it into the tab. So now I can move web parts into tabs. Still not super elegant because we have to know the ID of the tab, right? And that's not always going to be, you're not always going to know that ID. You don't want to have to go in there and always edit the page, look at the page, find the ID, and put that ID in your script. So we can take the information we know about that web part title and the way that web part was created. And if we look at it again, we see that it's got that span with a title, and we know what the ID looks like. So we can take this information with jQuery and make it a little bit easier for us. So I have another script for you guys here. So in this script, I have a function. And this function takes an array of web part titles. And so what this script does is it looks for a span on my page, because we know that those web parts those IDs were in a span, and we want to find a web part that has an ID, and that caret means starts with. So I don't have to know if it's WPQ4, WPQ5, WPQ6. I don't need to know the number of the web part. I just need to know what the ID starts with. Web part caption WPQ. So we're going to find the span that starts with that ID. And once we find that span, we're going to see if the title the span contains we're seeing if the title of that list view we're looking at is equal to the title from the array of web part titles we're going to pass into this function. If that title matches, we're going to dynamically create, we're going to dynamically create the tab. Here we're creating the list item, pointing to a dynamic content for the tab, and we're going to give it the title of the tab that was passed in. So here we're dynamically creating the content for our tab. And the last thing we do is we are going to stick this web part into our tabs. So we're basically taking what we did before that was hard-coded, and we said, OK, let's pass in an array of web part titles, make sure we find that list by looking at those spans and the web parts and then moving them into tabs. Again, I've blogged about this as well. If you guys want to use a copy and cut and copy script, just don't do 4 or 5, but copy and paste, and it will work most of the time. I like caveats. All right. So if I take this script, paste it in here, and you see we're already telling it to use the web part title of vendors. So we're already looking for the vendors web part. Vendors. Refresh the page. We see it creates one title because there's just one web part, and it's the web part for vendors. So now if we want to add another web part, we edit the page. We add a web part. We want to add the contracts web part. Stop editing it. You see our contracts is outside of the tabs. But if I just come back to my script and I say I want to pass in vendors and contracts, right? Just tell which other web part we want to have in the tab. Save it and refresh our page. We see that we now have tabs for vendors and for contracts. Right, so this allows us to stick multiple web parts into tabs, do it dynamically. The script in my blog has a couple different options. It'll either find every web part on the page and stick them into tabs for you, or you can specify which web parts you want inside of a tab. Any questions about that?
Just very simple one. Is that working off the title of the web part?
What's that?
Is that working off the title of the web part?
Yes, title of the web part. So if you're doing it in an edit or new form, or display form, it hides those titles by default on those web parts. So you need to go change the Chrome to be title or title and border only, because those titles are hidden on the edit forms. You want a t-shirt for that? Thanks for the reminder. Yes, sir. You gotta wear it.
Can you do all the web parts in a zone?
You could, right? Again, but you're gonna have to write more script to figure out which zone you're in. But basically anything on the page, you can write scripts to figure out, okay, here's where I'm at, find just the things in this zone. So with a little bit extra effort, you could do that. Right.
There's a notification on the screen.
So Hugh Wood has been watching, I guess he's watching my session. All right. All right. So next demo, we're going to talk about FullCalendar. Got like 5 minutes. We'll see how fast we can do this. This is the basic usage for FullCalendar, where you pass in some header information. And the magic for the FullCalendar library is what's ever in the events. So this events, we're going to do in our example, it's going to make a REST query to your calendar, and it's going to pop in a calendar with events. So here's our default script. We're including the FullCalendar libraries. We're creating a calendar here with some hard-coded events. So if we look at the events array, it's just going to be hard-coded random events. Because when you're finding a new library, it's always kind of nice to try it without you trying to use SharePoint first. Take their examples and make those examples work, and then try to get SharePoint in it, because you don't want to be fighting too many things at once. So let's save this. Delete this web part. So here we have the calendar view with hard-coded data. Again, this code will be available to you guys. Hard-coded data, nothing fancy. So we're going to add some REST to it to give it a little more functionality. So here in the second example, within the events, I'm executing a REST query using some jQuery. So here's what my REST query looks like. I'm getting from my tasks list, I'm getting the ID, the status, the title, the due date, who it's assigned to, using the start date and end date to figure out which tasks to return. This events function within FullCalendar, it passes in the first calendar date on the calendar and the last calendar date on the calendar. So using those dates, we can filter our results to only bring back the information we care about, because we don't want to pull back too much. It would just take way too much time. And after we get back those results, here in the call done, we're just manually creating our events by pushing them into an array where we're getting the title, who it's assigned to, start date and end date. So if I take this, just override it and paste it. Now, you can see it's populated with data from the task list. And it's actually spanning the days from the start date and end date. So you can make it span out. If that gets too messy for you, and you say, I just want to see when the task is due, we could just say, well, I want to set the start date to only show those based upon the due date. So now, by only specifying a start date, it will only show those items that have. Now it's when the tasks are due. So a little bit of control there. If we take this one step further in the next 3 minutes, here I am using the dreaded client object model. Does anybody like the client object model? So what I don't like about the client object model are those things called camel queries, right? She gets it. And this is what a nasty camel query looks like when you've got to do all of those inner joins, right? All the ors and the ends and the ors and the ends and the ors and the ends. It probably took me 3 days to write this, right? Oh, that's not quite right. Let's go in. But anyway, so here's the camel query that is actually going to be looking for all the dates for our calendar, those end dates, review dates, those start dates and end dates. And once that camel query gets the results, what we're going to do is we're going to push those events to our calendar, and I'm giving them different classes, because you can actually pass in the class name for the event you're pushing on the calendar. So you can create styles. I want a style for my end date. So if I'm pushing the end date of a contract onto a form, I want to give it the class name of end date so that it's going to be colored appropriately. So now you can get different colors for that calendar. So we're going to push all those on, and then we're just going to display the calendar. So now when we view the page, we see we have a nice little legend up here with those different colors. Then we scroll to some information. We see all the different color codings for that calendar. So now, each date type has its own class, so it's a different color, and we can show multiple dates and not just a start date and end date on the screen. And I also applied some jQuery that says, well, if I click on this start date field here, hide everything that's the class start date, or toggle it. So it's going to toggle it. So now they'll all disappear. If I click on it again, it brings them back. So we can go through and just make this easier for the users to read. Then click on it again to bring it back. Right? So you can see how you can use these libraries to just keep building on SharePoint's functionality that's already doing for you. Right? I didn't have to deploy any apps. I didn't have to open Visual Studio. Let's work on a script, get it working. Deployment's a breeze. It's really good for those clients who are really picky, who don't know what they want. And say, oh, I don't like that. Well, I can tweak it for you now. Right. Any questions from anybody? I think we're about out of time. I have one more chart demo that I will give you guys the code to, and if anybody wants to see it, you can come find me afterward, and I'll be more than happy to let you look at it. But But for now, I'll let the next person set up and get ready. Thank you.